Level 1. Ludwig Feuerbach. Death in Reflection. Ludwig Feuerbach, the 19th century German philosopher, lived in the shadows of the rising tides of materialism and idealism. He died quietly in 1872 in Rechenberg, Germany, after years of chronic illness and intellectual isolation. Feuerbach had spent his life questioning the divine, advocating that God was a projection of human longing. His death was neither dramatic nor violent, yet the silence surrounding it speaks volumes. In his final hours, he reportedly reflected on the consequences of his radical thinking, how challenging centuries of theological orthodoxy isolated him socially and professionally. Feuerbach's passing illustrates a subtle yet profound reality. Philosophers often die in the quiet of their convictions, their greatest battles fought internally against societal pressures and human fears of challenging sacred ideas. The story of his final moments invites viewers to consider mortality not just physically, but intellectually and morally. Level 2. David Hume, The Skeptic's End. David Hume, the Scottish skeptic and empiricist, died in Edinburgh in 1776 at the age of 65. Hume's death was peaceful in the eyes of the public, yet it followed a life spent probing the limits of reason and questioning humanity's reliance on faith. Known for his inquiries into cause and effect, Hume often pondered whether life itself could be rationally understood, or whether death would render all philosophical inquiry meaningless. In the final hours of his life, Hume reportedly remarked that death was nothing to fear, calling it the natural dissolution of perception. The irony lies in the serene acceptance of mortality by a man who challenged conventional beliefs about the afterlife and divine judgment. Hume's death demonstrates that philosophical bravery is not always outwardly dramatic, but resides in the courage to confront existential uncertainty with lucidity and humor. Level 3. Thomas Reid, the philosopher of common sense. Thomas Reid, another Scottish philosopher, passed away in 1796, leaving behind a legacy of common sense philosophy that countered Hume's skepticism. Reid's death was marked by the dignified simplicity of a life dedicated to reason, ethics, and clarity. He reportedly spent his last moments teaching and engaging with students, reinforcing his belief that knowledge was not merely abstract but lived. Unlike fiery or violent deaths, Reid's passing reflected a life where inquiry, teaching, and reflection merged seamlessly. His death reminds viewers that philosophy can end quietly yet powerfully, demonstrating that influence is often measured not by spectacle but by enduring ideas that outlive the body. Reid's story offers a lesson in humility and the power of steady intellectual courage. Level 4. Karl Jaspers, dying amid existential thought. Karl Jaspers, the 20th century German philosopher and psychiatrist, confronted the frailty of human life with philosophical rigor until his death in 1969. Known for existentialist insights, Jaspers faced the reality of mortality with reflective courage. In his final years, he remained engaged with the world, writing and mentoring, even as age and illness encroached. Jaspers's death was not sensational, but carried existential weight. The man who explored the limits of human freedom and consciousness left life with the calm acceptance of someone who had wrestled with death philosophically. His passing challenges viewers to confront their mortality thoughtfully, recognizing that understanding life's meaning involves facing its inevitable conclusion with awareness rather than fear. Level 5. Isaiah Berlin, Death of Ideas. Isaiah Berlin, the historian of ideas and liberal philosopher, died in 1997 in Oxford, England. His death, though peaceful, represents the fading of a unique intellectual era. Berlin spent his life mapping the landscape of human thought, analyzing freedom, pluralism, and conflict. In his final moments, it is said that he reflected on the multiplicity of values and the impossibility of a single moral truth. Berlin's death, quiet and contemplative, demonstrates the philosopher's constant engagement with ideas until the very end. It offers a meditation for viewers. The philosopher's death is often less about physical demise and more about the culmination of a lifetime of ideas and intellectual conversations that continue to shape minds long after the body ceases to exist. Level 6. Peter Singer, the ethicist's closing reflections. Peter Singer, while still alive as of this writing, provides a living example of ethical thought confronting life and death decisions. Imagining Singer's death in a distant future, one can envision it reflecting his lifelong concern with ethical treatment, human and animal rights, and moral responsibility. A philosopher who challenged norms around life, death, and suffering, Singer's passing would likely be contemplative and principled, perhaps surrounded by those whose lives were altered by his moral reasoning. The story of his death, even as a hypothetical, emphasizes the risk and danger philosophers face when confronting ethical taboos, pushing society to rethink the morality of everyday life, and how these legacies extend beyond mortality. Level 7. Cornel West, Confronting Social Deaths. Cornel West, a modern philosopher and social critic, has made the confrontation with injustice and mortality central to his philosophy. Though still living, imagining his eventual passing evokes images of struggle intertwined with reflection. West's philosophical death would echo his lifelong fight against societal oppression, illustrating how philosophers often die not only in body, but symbolically as their era of activism closes. His story conveys to viewers that philosophy is inseparable from lived experience and the courage to face social, moral, and existential crises, a death that leaves enduring ethical challenges as part of the narrative. Level 8. Karl Popper, Falsifying Life Itself. Karl Popper, who died in 1994 in London, approached life and death with the same rigor he applied to science and society, critically, cautiously, and truthfully. Famous for falsifiability as a criterion for scientific knowledge, Popper reportedly faced death as a final test of assumptions and ideas. In his last reflections, he considered the impermanence of human understanding and the importance of maintaining openness to revision even as life ends. His death, while peaceful, carries the metaphorical weight of falsification applied to human existence itself. Each life is a hypothesis tested against reality, and death is the ultimate conclusion. This perspective encourages viewers to see mortality as an extension of critical thought, not merely a biological event. Level 9. Jacques Derrida, Deconstructing the Final Hour. Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher who died in 2004, spent his life dissecting language, text, and meaning. His death from pancreatic cancer was a stark reminder that even the most abstract intellect faces physical limits. Derrida reportedly remained engaged with ideas until the end, dictating thoughts and correspondences even from his sickbed. The danger, the shock, and the vulnerability of his final moments demonstrate the tension between mind and body, thought and mortality. Derrida's story encourages viewers to critically examine how language, legacy, and memory persist beyond the corporeal, and how philosophers often die in public consciousness long after physical death. Level 10. Albert Camus, The Absurd End. Albert Camus, the existentialist and absurdist, died suddenly in a car accident in 1960, at the age of 46. His death was shocking and violent, a real-life reflection of the unpredictability he explored in his philosophy. Camus confronted the absurdity of life, embracing human freedom and ethical responsibility despite its inherent meaninglessness. The suddenness of his passing mirrors the existential themes he championed. Life ends abruptly, without warning or cosmic justice. For viewers, Camus's death is both tragic and illustrative, compelling reflection on the tension between human desire for meaning and the chaotic nature of existence. His story ensures retention by connecting shocking real-life events with profound philosophical insights. Level 11. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Return to Nature. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the revolutionary French philosopher, died in 1778 on the Île Saint-Pierre in Paris, a city he had criticized for its corruption and artificiality. Rousseau's death was marked by isolation, estrangement, and the bitter irony that the man who championed the natural goodness of humanity had spent his life in public conflict, suspicion, and exile. In his final days, he reportedly wandered the countryside, reflecting on his concept of the social contract and the tensions between freedom and civilization. Rousseau's passing demonstrates the danger of visionary thought. The very society one critiques may reject, isolate, or misunderstand you. His death also embodies the philosophical theme of returning to nature, confronting mortality as part of the organic cycle of human existence, and leaving a legacy that continues to challenge political and moral reasoning centuries later. Level 12. John Stuart Mill, Rational Exit. John Stuart Mill, the utilitarian philosopher and advocate of individual liberty, died in 1873 in Avignon, France. Mill's death followed decades of mental struggle, exhaustion, and relentless engagement with political reform, social justice, and ethical philosophy. Known for promoting reasoned discourse and balancing liberty with societal welfare, Mill reportedly approached death with calm reflection, considering the practical consequences of life's choices. The quiet nature of his passing contrasts sharply with the revolutionary impact of his ideas. Mill's life and death together emphasize the subtle power of philosophy. Profound influence can occur not in dramatic moments, but through sustained intellectual engagement, meticulous reasoning, and ethical consistency, leaving viewers to contemplate mortality as a stage for measured reflection rather than spectacle. Level 13. Ludwig Wittgenstein, Language and Silence. Ludwig Wittgenstein, the 20th century philosopher of language and logic, died in 1951 in Cambridge, England, after a battle with cancer. Wittgenstein's death was as introspective as his life. A man who sought clarity and precision in thought spent his final moments wrestling with the ambiguities of meaning and existence. His last words reportedly reflected gratitude for friendship, human connection, and the mysteries that outlast linguistic articulation. Wittgenstein's death exemplifies the intersection of intellectual rigor and human vulnerability. The philosopher's body succumbs while ideas, reflections, and debates endure. For viewers, this story provides a deep lesson on the fragility of life and the enduring power of thought, demonstrating that death can be a moment of contemplative closure rather than only physical cessation. Level 14. Confucius, Harmonizing with Eternity. Confucius, the Chinese sage of moral order, ethics, and societal harmony, passed in 479 BCE at the age of 72. His death, unlike the violent ends of some philosophers, was marked by serenity and ritual. Confucius's final reflections reportedly emphasized the importance of virtue, family, and governance aligned with the way, Tao. Historical accounts suggest that even as death approached, Confucius taught his disciples, guiding the living in the art of moral cultivation. His passing underscores the duality of philosophical influence. Life is finite, yet the ethical and cultural frameworks one constructs endure across generations. For viewers, Confucius's death serves as a meditation on the enduring power of teaching and the subtle immortality of wisdom. Level 15. Martin Heidegger, The Question of Being Confronted. Martin Heidegger, the German existentialist and ontologist, died in 1976 in Freiburg. Known for his probing inquiry into being and the nature of existence, Heidegger faced death as the ultimate philosophical question incarnate. In his final reflections, he reportedly contemplated temporality, authenticity, and the inescapable encounter with finitude. His passing illustrates the inherent danger and depth of existential thought. Those who analyze the nature of existence confront the terror and awe of mortality more consciously than most. For viewers, Heidegger's death invites critical thinking about how one lives authentically, emphasizing that philosophy is not abstract but profoundly entwined with the human experience of life and death. Level 16. Baruch Spinoza, Ethics to the End. Baruch Spinoza, the Dutch rationalist philosopher, died of pulmonary illness in 1677 at the age of 44. Spinoza's death, while physically tragic, reflected a lifetime of intellectual daring. Having challenged religious orthodoxy, political authority, and metaphysical assumptions, Spinoza lived in modest isolation, publishing clandestinely to avoid persecution. His passing exemplifies the dangerous intersection of revolutionary thought and human vulnerability. Yet in his last moments, Spinoza reportedly remained devoted to the contemplation of God or nature, embodying his ethical vision until the end. For viewers, Spinoza's death offers a stark lesson. Intellectual courage carries real-world risks, but the legacy of clear, rational thought can outlive persecution, illness, and bodily decay. Level 17. Bertrand Russell, Reason in the Face of Mortality. Bertrand Russell, the British logician, mathematician, and social critic, died in 1970 at the age of 97. Russell's death was relatively peaceful, Yet the weight of a life spent confronting war, religion, and societal dogma imbues it with philosophical resonance. In his final reflections, he reportedly emphasized reason, tolerance, and critical engagement with life's challenges. Russell's passing demonstrates how philosophical influence can extend over decades, with the death of the thinker not ending the debates, arguments, and ideas that shaped centuries of intellectual discourse. His story reminds viewers that mortality may be inevitable, but enduring thought can transcend time, shaping human understanding long after the physical body is gone. Level 18. Michel Foucault, Power and the Last Breath. Michel Foucault, the French philosopher who deconstructed power, knowledge, and societal institutions, died in 1984 of AIDS-related complications. His death was both tragic and emblematic. A man who examined the mechanisms of control and discipline succumbed to a disease deeply stigmatized in his lifetime. Foucault's final days reportedly included reflection on the social constructs he spent decades interrogating, illustrating the intimate link between life, vulnerability, and intellectual struggle. For viewers, his death is both shocking and instructive. It demonstrates how philosophers confront not only abstract ideas, but the tangible dangers and societal judgments that accompany radical critique. Level 19. Simone de Beauvoir. Existential departure. Simone de Beauvoir, the French existentialist and feminist philosopher, died in 1986 at the age of 78 in Paris. Known for her courageous critique of gender norms and existential exploration of freedom, de Beauvoir faced mortality with philosophical composure. Her final reflections reportedly emphasized responsibility, freedom, and the enduring struggle for equality. The danger in her life and death lay not in physical threats, but in the societal and intellectual upheaval she provoked. For viewers, de Beauvoir's passing offers a lesson in courage. The philosopher's life and death can be a mirror to social and existential challenges, prompting reflection on personal and collective responsibility. Level 20. Augustine of Hippo, Faith Meets Mortality. Augustine of Hippo, the early Christian philosopher and theologian, died in 430 CE during the sack of Hippo by the Vandals. His death was dramatic, surrounded by chaos, violence, and uncertainty, yet it reflects the life of a thinker who bridged faith and reason. Augustine's final moments were likely consumed with reflection on sin, grace, and the eternal soul. Unlike other philosophers who died quietly, Augustine's death illustrates the intersection of historical turbulence and philosophical contemplation. For viewers, it exemplifies how mortality can be sudden, chaotic, and infused with existential urgency, highlighting the complex dance between historical events, personal belief, and the enduring power of intellectual legacy. Level 21. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, The Dialectic of Departure. Hegel, the German idealist, died in 1831 in Berlin during a cholera epidemic. Despite his towering intellectual stature, his death was painfully ordinary, an irony that would not have escaped Hegel himself. The philosopher who had spent a lifetime articulating the evolution of spirit, history, and consciousness succumbed to one of the most chaotic forces of his era. Witnesses described him surrounded by disciples, continuing to discuss philosophy even as his body failed. Hegel's passing is a stark reminder: death respects no hierarchy of intellect. His life's work, the unfolding dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, now met its ultimate antithesis in the frailty of the human body. For viewers, this story underscores the tension between immortality of thought and mortality of flesh, offering profound reflection on the limits of human power and knowledge. Level 22. Epicurus, Seeking Pleasure to the End. Epicurus, the ancient Greek philosopher, died in 270 BCE in Athens. Known for advocating the pursuit of simple pleasures and freedom from fear, Epicurus faced death without terror, practicing the very philosophy he preached. He reportedly advised his followers to see death as nothing to fear, for the body dissolves and sensation ends. Yet his death was not without historical drama. Athens was politically unstable, and philosophical schools were under scrutiny. Epicurus's passing provides a paradoxical lesson. Philosophical clarity can coexist with worldly chaos. For viewers, it evokes critical thinking. How might one live fully if death is inevitable? His story invites reflection on pleasure, fear, and the human confrontation with mortality. Level 23, Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan Meets Mortality. Thomas Hobbes, the author of Leviathan, died in 1679 in Derbyshire, England, at the age of 91. Known for his bleak view of human nature, Hobbes's death was relatively peaceful, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime spent contemplating societal order, fear, and conflict. Hobbes often argued that without strong governance, humanity would fall into chaos, a theory mirrored in the unpredictability of life and death. His passing offers viewers a meditation on inevitability. The philosopher who theorized about control and chaos ultimately surrendered to forces beyond human governance. Hobbes's story teaches that intellectual mastery does not exempt one from mortality, highlighting the dangerous humility inherent in philosophical inquiry. Level 24, Avicenna, Ibn Sina. The Healer, Philosopher's Farewell. Avicenna, the Persian polymath of the Islamic Golden Age, died in 1037 in Hamadan, Iran. Renowned for integrating Aristotelian philosophy with medicine, Avicenna's death came after years of illness and exhaustion from his relentless scholarship. The philosopher-physician reportedly spent his final days writing, dictating, and teaching, blurring the line between life and intellectual legacy. His death embodies the dual danger of relentless intellectual pursuit, physical frailty juxtaposed with enduring mental vigor. Viewers are drawn to consider the tension between the body's limits and the mind's potential, and how mortality confronts even the most disciplined and brilliant human intellect. Level 25, Averroes, Ibn Rushd, the commentator's quiet end. Averroes, the 12th century Andalusian philosopher, passed away in 1198 in Cordoba, Spain. Known for his commentaries on Aristotle, Averroes spent a life mediating between faith, reason, and secular authority. His death was reportedly quiet, yet symbolically charged, a life bridging cultural, religious, and philosophical divides, concluding in a city that had witnessed both intellectual flourishing and political tension. The danger in Averroes' life and death lay in navigating a world where philosophical inquiry could attract censure or exile. His story underscores to viewers that philosophers often confront societal forces as perilous as any natural threat, and death may arrive quietly, yet with a legacy shaped by courage and intellectual daring. Level 26, Søren Kierkegaard, Anxiety at Life's End. Kierkegaard, the Danish existentialist, died in 1855 in Copenhagen, surrounded by the weight of his own psychological intensity. Known for his exploration of angst, despair, and faith, Kierkegaard's death mirrored his philosophy, inward, turbulent, and reflective. Reports suggest he remained preoccupied with the relationship between individual freedom and divine expectation. Even as his body succumbed to illness, his final days offer a potent example of philosophical danger. Confronting ultimate questions of existence can leave a mind tormented and isolated. Viewers are drawn to ponder the cost of deep self-examination and the inevitability of facing death while wrestling with the meaning of life. Level 27, Aristotle of Stagira, the Teacher's Last Lesson. Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, died in 322 BCE in Euboea, Greece, reportedly from natural causes following a life of intellectual brilliance and political entanglement. Aristotle's death was a quiet end to a life dedicated to observation, logic, ethics, and the categorization of knowledge. Yet the historical context carries dramatic tension. The fall of Athens, the legacy of Alexander the Great, and political instability colored his final years. His passing exemplifies the danger and reward of intellectual pursuit, shaping thought that will endure millennia, even as the body fades. For viewers, Aristotle's death highlights the enduring influence of structured, critical reasoning and the quiet heroism of cultivating wisdom in a volatile world. Level 28, Pythagoras, Numbers and the Final Harmony. Pythagoras, the ancient Greek mathematician and philosopher, is said to have died around 495 BCE, though historical accounts are shrouded in mystery. Some claim he fled political upheaval in Croton, Italy, while others suggest natural causes. Pythagoras' death embodies the intersection of myth, numerology, and philosophy, a man whose life was devoted to finding harmony in numbers and cosmic order. leaving behind a legacy both mathematical and mystical. The danger surrounding his death, political violence, secret societies, and esoteric teachings adds drama to his story. Viewers are invited to reflect on how philosophers' deaths can be as enigmatic as their lives, reinforcing the intertwining of historical context and intellectual legacy. Level 29, Heraclitus, the obscure river of life. Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher from Ephesus, died around 475 BCE, though exact details are obscure. Known as the weeping philosopher, he reportedly isolated himself, reflecting on the flux of existence, fire as a symbol of life, and the inevitability of change. Accounts suggest he succumbed to illness and neglect, a solitary death echoing the impermanence and constant motion he philosophized about. Heraclitus's passing demonstrates to viewers that philosophical insight does not guarantee comfort or recognition, but it does leave enduring conceptual frameworks that continue to shape thought centuries later. The danger and drama of his final days lie in the tension between the brilliance of his ideas and the obscurity of his mortal end. Level 30, Zeno of Citium, Stoic silence in the final moment. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, died around 262 BCE in Athens, having taught resilience, virtue, and rational control over emotion. Historical accounts suggest he passed peacefully, embodying the philosophy he promoted. Acceptance of fate, the inevitability of death, and the pursuit of inner tranquility. Zeno's death offers viewers a narrative of philosophical courage, the ultimate lesson that a well-lived, reflective life prepares the mind for the certainty of mortality. Yet his life and death were not devoid of danger. The Hellenistic period was turbulent, with political unrest and social instability threatening even prominent thinkers. Zeno's final moments remind viewers that philosophy is a practical art, and death is a test of one's adherence to the principles cultivated throughout life. Level 31, Giordano Bruno, Flames of Radical Thought. Giordano Bruno, the Italian philosopher, cosmologist, and occult thinker, met a tragic and infamous death in 1600 in Rome. Accused of heresy by the Roman Inquisition for his radical ideas, belief in an infinite universe, multiple worlds, and the divinity in nature, Bruno was burned at the stake. His final moments reportedly included courage, defiance, and reflection on the eternity of the cosmos. The horror of his execution contrasts starkly with the brilliance of his thought. For viewers, Bruno's death embodies the ultimate danger of philosophical pursuit, the collision between revolutionary ideas and authoritarian power. It invites reflection on intellectual courage, societal resistance to radical thinking, and the chilling consequences of challenging dogma. His story remains a shocking reminder that truth and insight can provoke mortal peril. Level 32, Al-Farabi, the virtuous philosopher's quiet end. Al-Farabi, the medieval Islamic philosopher, died in 950 CE, leaving behind a legacy bridging Greek philosophy and Islamic thought. Known for his exploration of ethics, logic, and political philosophy, Al-Farabi reportedly spent his final days teaching, writing, and reflecting on the ideal city and the virtuous life. Unlike Bruno, his death was quiet, yet the danger and challenge lay in navigating intellectual innovation under the scrutiny of religious orthodoxy. For viewers, his passing emphasizes the subtler perils philosophers face: marginalization, cultural resistance, and the tension between creative thought and societal norms. Al-Farabi's story is a meditation on the quiet heroism of intellectual legacy. Level 33, Maimonides, A Life of Exile and Legacy. Maimonides, the Jewish philosopher, theologian, and legal scholar, died in 1204 in Fustat, Egypt. His life was marked by exile, political upheaval, and the struggle to reconcile faith and reason. His death reportedly occurred in the midst of study and teaching, a life ending in devotion to knowledge. Maimonides' passing illustrates the danger of philosophical life in politically and socially unstable environments, where intellectual pursuit intersects with cultural and religious tension. For viewers, his story highlights the endurance of ideas. Mortality may claim the body, but written works, disciples, and ethical influence outlive it. Level 34, John Rawls, Justice in the Final Hour. John Rawls, the modern political philosopher, died in 2002 in Lexington, Massachusetts. Known for a theory of justice, Rawls's death came after decades of rigorous thought on fairness, societal structure, and the moral foundations of governance. His final reflections reportedly involved ethical responsibility, the balance between liberty and equality, and the human capacity for cooperation. Rawls's passing provides viewers with insight into the quiet power of philosophical influence. A life devoted to rigorous thinking can shape societies long after the thinker is gone. The danger in Rawls's life was subtler than Bruno's. The intellectual struggle to convince societies to rethink justice and morality. Level 35. Isaiah Berlin, Liberty and Mortality. Isaiah Berlin, the 20th century political philosopher and historian of ideas, died in 1997 in Oxford, England. Known for his exploration of liberty, pluralism, and the conflict of values, Berlin faced death in the twilight of a life devoted to understanding human freedom. Accounts suggest he passed peacefully, surrounded by reflection and intellectual correspondence. Berlin's death underscores the philosophical danger of confronting the complexity of human values. Living in full recognition of moral plurality is intellectually taxing, and facing mortality invites existential contemplation. For viewers, his passing highlights the interplay of history, thought, and the quiet, reflective confrontation with death. Level 36. Peter Singer, Ethical Reflections to the End. Peter Singer, a contemporary philosopher and advocate of animal rights and effective altruism, is still living, but imagining his eventual death offers insight into ethical engagement as a lifelong endeavor. Singer's hypothetical passing could emphasize moral responsibility, the consequences of human action, and the weight of philosophical argument. Even without historical details, contemplating the death of modern thinkers introduces the audience to the danger and challenge of ethical reasoning. The struggle to live consistently with one's moral philosophy is ongoing, and mortality offers the ultimate test. This reflective approach deepens engagement and retention for viewers by encouraging critical thinking about life, action, and death. Level 37. Cornel West, Courage and Contemplation. Cornel West, the American philosopher, activist, and public intellectual, also continues to influence contemporary thought. Imagining the culmination of his life underscores the philosophical danger inherent in social critique. Speaking truth to power can threaten physical, social, and emotional safety. West's death, whether real or reflective, would mark the passing of a thinker who lived at the intersection of race, politics, ethics, and public discourse. For viewers, this level illustrates the existential stakes of philosophy in action. Ideas are not abstract, they intersect with society, danger, and human responsibility. Level 38. Karl Popper, Falsifiability at Life's End. Karl Popper, the philosopher of science and critic of totalitarianism, died in 1994 in London. Popper's reflections on falsifiability, the evolution of knowledge, and the limits of certainty framed both his life and death. Reports suggest he faced mortality with curiosity, reflecting on the progress of human understanding and the open-ended nature of knowledge. His death embodies philosophical danger and challenge. Living in constant pursuit of truth involves intellectual risk, social challenge, and confronting fallibility. Viewers are encouraged to think critically. The philosopher's life and death illuminate the ongoing human struggle to understand and improve the world. Level 39. Jacques Derrida, Deconstruction in the Last Breath. Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher and founder of deconstruction, died in 2004 in Paris. Known for unraveling textual and conceptual structures, Derrida's death was both literal and symbolic, the end of a life dedicated to questioning meaning, hierarchy, and authority. In his final days, he reportedly reflected on the instability of language and the impermanence of thought itself. Derrida's passing demonstrates the philosophical danger of radical intellectual innovation. Ideas can unsettle societies, provoke critics, and challenge convention, sometimes exposing the thinker to isolation or controversy. For viewers, this story highlights the tension between legacy, mortality, and the audacity to question everything. Level 40. Gilles Deleuze, Becoming and Final Transformation. Gilles Deleuze, the French postmodern philosopher, died in 1995 after a long struggle with respiratory illness. Known for his explorations of multiplicity, becoming, and desire, Deleuze approached death as an extension of his philosophy. Life as constant flux and transformation. His passing was reportedly reflective, contemplative, and marked by engagement with ideas until the final moments. The danger in Deleuze's life was intellectual. Radical ideas often provoke misunderstanding, critique, and tension within academic and societal frameworks. For viewers, Deleuze's death is an invitation to meditate on mortality as philosophical practice, considering life as a continuous process of questioning, transformation, and engagement with the unknown. Level 41. Albert Camus, The Absurd and the End of Life. Albert Camus, the French-Algerian existentialist and novelist, passed away in 1960 in a car accident in Villeblevin, France. Known for his philosophy of the absurd, Camus' death was sudden, ironic, and tragic, mirroring the unpredictability of existence that he so eloquently described. In his lifetime, Camus wrestled with the tension between human desire for meaning and the universe's indifference. The abruptness of his death illustrates the ultimate lesson of his philosophy. Life is fragile, unpredictable, and finite. For viewers, Camus' story invokes reflection on human resilience, the courage to confront absurdity, and the ever-present shadow of mortality. His death, shocking in its randomness, reminds us that philosophical engagement must contend with the raw realities of the world. Level 42. Jean-Paul Sartre, Existence and Departure. Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist and political thinker, died in 1980 in Paris. Sartre's philosophy of radical freedom, responsibility, and anguish accompanied him until the end. Reports suggest he spent his final days immersed in writing and discussion, reflecting on human freedom and the weight of choice. His death was both personal and symbolic, the end of a life devoted to exploring the human condition, freedom, and the consequences of our actions. For viewers, Sartre's passing emphasizes the philosophical danger of radical thought. Freedom carries existential responsibility, and confronting mortality forces reflection on every life decision. Level 43. Hannah Arendt, The Banality of Death. Hannah Arendt, the political theorist famed for the origins of totalitarianism, died in 1975 in New York City. Known for exploring evil, responsibility, and the mechanisms of power, Arendt's death was quiet but intellectually charged. Throughout her life, she faced political exile, societal critique, and personal danger, yet she remained committed to rigorous observation and reflection. Her passing illustrates to viewers the profound interplay between intellectual courage and human vulnerability. Arendt's story underscores that even thinkers confronting the darkest aspects of society must reconcile with mortality, blending historical, philosophical, and personal dimensions in a deeply human narrative. Level 44. Thomas More, Martyrdom of Conscience. Thomas More, the English statesman and philosopher, met a dramatic and historically significant death in 1535 in London. Executed by beheading for refusing to endorse King Henry VIII's separation from the Catholic Church, More's final moments epitomize the danger of philosophical conviction confronting political authority. His calm, resolute demeanor reportedly inspired awe in witnesses, blending courage with intellectual and moral integrity. For viewers, More's story exemplifies the deadly risks philosophers face when ideas and conscience collide with power. It prompts reflection on the ethical and existential costs of living in alignment with one's principles. Level 45. Michel de Montaigne, Essays to the End. Michel de Montaigne, the French Renaissance philosopher and essayist, died in 1592 in Bordeaux, France. Montaigne's reflections on human nature, mortality, and skepticism shaped a literary and philosophical tradition. Reports suggest that even in his final days, he continued to write and meditate on the human condition, merging observation with personal reflection. Montaigne's death, though natural, was layered with the philosophical challenge of reconciling knowledge, experience, and mortality. For viewers, his story encourages deep engagement. The process of writing, thinking, and reflecting persists until the end, offering lessons on the integration of life experience into enduring philosophical insight. Level 46. Francis Bacon, The Empirical Risk. Francis Bacon, the English philosopher and statesman, died in 1626 under circumstances illustrating both intellectual ingenuity and human vulnerability. Bacon reportedly contracted pneumonia while experimenting with preservation techniques involving snow, a demonstration of his empirical curiosity until the final moments. His death dramatizes the danger of philosophical and scientific exploration. The pursuit of knowledge can carry unforeseen risks. For viewers, Bacon's story highlights the intersection of discovery, human curiosity, and mortality, reinforcing the tension between intellectual audacity and the fragile human body. Level 47. David Ricardo, Political Economy's Mortality. David Ricardo, the British economist and philosopher, passed away in 1823. Known for his theories on rent, wages, and economic distribution, Ricardo's death was relatively quiet, yet reflective of the human limits behind theoretical abstraction. His life illustrates the philosophical danger of neglecting practical realities. Economic theory may shape nations, but mortality shapes the thinker. For viewers, Ricardo's passing emphasizes the interplay between abstract thought, societal influence, and the human condition, offering lessons on legacy, the responsibility of knowledge, and the inevitability of death. Level 48. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Human Endings. Adam Smith, the Scottish philosopher and economist, died in 1790 in Edinburgh. Renowned for the wealth of nations and reflections on moral philosophy, Smith's final days reportedly involved contemplation of ethics, human behavior, and societal order. His death symbolizes the danger inherent in connecting abstract ideas to lived reality. Philosophy and economics influence millions, yet the thinker remains bound by the finite span of life. Viewers are invited to consider the tension between enduring intellectual influence and ephemeral human existence, reflecting on Smith's balance of moral and economic insight in the face of mortality. Level 49. Blaise Pascal, Reason, Faith, and Fragility. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, philosopher, and theologian, died in 1662 in Paris after a lifetime of brilliant but fragile health. Known for Pascal's wager, explorations of human reason, and reflections on faith, Pascal's death illustrates the delicate balance between intellect and corporeality. His final moments reportedly involved meditation on God, mortality, and human limitation. The story is both shocking and reflective, a mind of extraordinary capacity constrained by the physical fragility that philosophy cannot overcome. For viewers, Pascal's passing is a meditation on the existential tension between thought, belief, and the inevitability of death. Level 50. Mary Wollstonecraft, Enlightenment Interrupted. Mary Wollstonecraft, the English philosopher and advocate for women's rights, died tragically in 1797, shortly after childbirth. Her death at age 38 underscores the perilous intersection of life, social expectation, and philosophical engagement. Wollstonecraft's writings on equality, rights, and reason resonate centuries later, yet her passing reflects the fragility and danger of a life spent challenging societal norms. For viewers, Wollstonecraft's story evokes both tragedy and admiration, emphasizing that the pursuit of justice, reason, and intellectual integrity often comes with profound personal risk. Her death amplifies the human stakes of philosophical endeavor, weaving biography, history, and reflection into a narrative of courage and impermanence. Level 51. Jeremy Bentham, Rationalism and Legacy. Jeremy Bentham, the English philosopher and jurist, died in 1832 in London, leaving behind a vision of utilitarianism that would profoundly influence moral philosophy and legal reform. Known for the principle of the greatest happiness for the greatest number, Bentham's death was comparatively peaceful but symbolically powerful. His body was preserved as an auto-icon, an unusual act reflecting both his eccentricity and his desire for posthumous influence. The danger in Bentham's life lay in advocating radical reforms that challenged entrenched societal and religious norms. For viewers, Bentham's story underscores the tension between revolutionary thought and human mortality. His physical death did not end his influence, illustrating the enduring power of ideas over the fragility of flesh. Level 52. Edmund Burke, Conservative Reflection at Life's End. Edmund Burke, the Irish-British political philosopher, died in 1797. Known for his reflections on society, tradition, and the French Revolution, Burke's death came after decades of intellectual engagement and political debate. His passing exemplifies the subtler dangers of philosophical life, engaging with society's ideological battles, balancing personal convictions with public opinion, and confronting historical upheaval. For viewers, Burke's death demonstrates that even quiet, reflective lives are shaped by the tension between thought and societal forces, reminding us that philosophy is not abstract, it is lived and contested. Level 53. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Transcendental Departure. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American transcendentalist, essayist, and philosopher, died in 1882 in Concord, Massachusetts. Emerson's work celebrated individuality, self-reliance, and the inherent divinity of nature. Reports suggest his final days were reflective, spent contemplating nature, mortality, and the moral responsibility of life. His death embodies the philosophical tension of transcendental thought, aligning human experience with higher principles while confronting the finite nature of life. For viewers, Emerson's story highlights the enduring relevance of philosophical reflection in everyday life, encouraging contemplation of how ideas survive beyond death. Level 54. Henry David Thoreau, Immortal in Reflection. Henry David Thoreau, the American philosopher, naturalist, and author of Walden, died in 1862 from tuberculosis. Thoreau's philosophy of simple living, civil disobedience, and environmental reflection defined his life and shaped subsequent generations. His death, marked by physical frailty but intellectual vitality, illustrates the danger of living fully in pursuit of thought and principle. The body may fail, but ideas endure. For viewers, Thoreau's story reinforces the connection between nature, reflection, and the philosophical understanding of life and death, making his passing a meditation on the persistence of legacy. Level 55. Tommaso Campanella, Chains and Final Thought. Tommaso Campanella, the Italian philosopher, theologian, and poet, died in 1639 after a lifetime marked by imprisonment for heresy and political rebellion. His works, including The City of the Sun, challenged ecclesiastical authority and envisioned utopian societies. Campanella's death in old age was a quiet release after decades of danger, persecution, and intellectual struggle. For viewers, his story highlights the perilous intersection of radical thought, political power, and mortality, emphasizing the courage required to pursue transformative ideas against societal constraints. Level 56. Giambattista Vico, the philosopher of history's end. Giambattista Vico, the Italian philosopher of history, died in 1744 in Naples. Known for the new science, Vico explored cycles of history, culture, and civilization, emphasizing human creativity and societal evolution. His death, quiet but reflective, illustrates the subtle dangers of philosophical life, the challenge of intellectual obscurity, the struggle for recognition, and the necessity of perseverance. For viewers, Vico's passing offers lessons on the value of observation, patience, and understanding the patterns of human thought as a legacy that outlives the individual. Level 57. Desiderius Erasmus, Humanism and the Quiet End. Desiderius Erasmus, the Dutch Renaissance humanist, died in 1536 in Basel, Switzerland. Renowned for advocating religious tolerance, education, and moral reflection, Erasmus's life was dedicated to reasoned discourse and intellectual moderation. His death, reportedly peaceful, underscores a danger less about persecution and more about irrelevance. Ideas must resonate to survive. For viewers, Erasmus's story is a reflection on the balance between critical thought, diplomacy, and mortality, illustrating the subtle power and vulnerability inherent in philosophical life. Level 58. Plato of Athens, the philosopher's timeless farewell. Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher and student of Socrates, reportedly died around 347 BCE in Athens. Renowned for founding the academy and exploring justice, reality, and the forms, Plato's death is largely unrecorded in dramatic terms, but its significance resonates through history. His passing symbolizes the transition from the Socratic method to a codified philosophical system, where thought outlives the individual. For viewers, Plato's story offers insight into the enduring power of philosophical institutions and ideas, highlighting the immortality of reason, reflection, and structured thought. Level 59. Sextus Empiricus, Skepticism's Silent Exit. Sextus Empiricus, the Greek Pyrrhonist philosopher, died around the 3rd century CE. His work on skepticism challenged assumptions, questioned dogma, and promoted philosophical inquiry without claiming certainty. Sextus' death, largely unrecorded, emphasizes the quiet power of skeptical thought. The danger lies not in persecution, but in being forgotten or misunderstood. For viewers, Sextus' life and passing illustrate the subtle tension between intellectual rigor, societal engagement, and mortality, reinforcing the reflective nature of philosophy as both practical and existential inquiry. Level 60. Plotinus, Mysticism and Final Contemplation. Plotinus, the ancient philosopher and founder of Neoplatonism, died in 270 CE in Rome. His life was devoted to the pursuit of the One, contemplation of the soul, and integration of mystical insight with philosophical reasoning. His death was peaceful, reflecting a lifetime immersed in metaphysical thought. Plotinus' passing highlights the danger inherent in abstraction. While removed from political or societal peril, the philosopher confronts the ultimate existential challenge, mortality and the continuation of the soul's inquiry. For viewers, Plotinus' story exemplifies philosophy as a journey beyond the material, illustrating the interplay between life, thought, and the mystery of death. Level 61. Porphyry, philosopher and protector of thought. Porphyry, the Neoplatonist philosopher and student of Plotinus, died around 305 CE. Known for defending philosophy against religious criticism and for his work on logic, Porphyry lived under Roman rule where intellectual and religious tensions could turn deadly. His death, likely natural, symbolizes the quiet persistence of thought in the face of societal pressures. Porphyry's life illustrates a philosophical danger, less of physical peril and more of intellectual erasure. The challenge of ensuring ideas endure beyond personal mortality. For viewers, his story highlights the responsibility of preserving, interpreting, and transmitting philosophical knowledge, showing that death may end the philosopher's life, but not the legacy of their work. Level 62. Duns Scotus, Subtlety and Mortality. Duns Scotus, the medieval scholastic philosopher and theologian, died in 1308 in Cologne. Renowned for his intricate arguments on metaphysics, morality, and theology, Scotus's intellectual rigor was both admired and feared. The danger in his life lay in the intensity of scholastic debate, political intrigue within the church, and the physical demands of scholarly pursuit in medieval Europe. His death marks the quiet culmination of a life dedicated to reasoned subtlety, reflecting the tension between intellectual ambition and human frailty. For viewers, Scotus's story emphasizes that the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the challenges of societal, political, and personal constraints. Level 63. William of Ockham, the razor's final edge. William of Ockham, the English philosopher and theologian, died around 1347. Known for Ockham's razor, the principle favoring simplicity over unnecessary complexity, he challenged church authority and engaged in political disputes. Ockham spent years in exile, highlighting the danger philosophers face when questioning entrenched power. His death represents the ultimate liberation from earthly conflict, yet also the unresolved tension of ideas living on after the thinker departs. For viewers, Ockham's story demonstrates the hazards of critical thought, the courage required to question authority, and the enduring impact of precise, disciplined reasoning. Level 64. Meister Eckhart, Mystic Philosopher's End. Meister Eckhart, the German mystic and philosopher, died around 1327. Eckhart's teachings on God, the soul, and detachment faced scrutiny from the Church, illustrating the inherent danger in mystical philosophy during medieval times. His death, relatively peaceful, contrasts with the trials he faced, highlighting that the philosopher's end can be calm even after a life of perilous inquiry. For viewers, Eckhart's story underscores the interplay of thought, spiritual exploration, and historical context, showing how the philosopher navigates both societal pressure and the universal certainty of death. Level 65. Ramon Lull, missionary and martyr of knowledge. Ramon Lull, the Catalan philosopher, theologian and polymath, died in 1315. He traveled extensively, seeking to convert others through reasoned dialogue and philosophical argument, often placing himself in physical danger. Lull's death demonstrates the hazards of intellectual engagement in volatile political and religious climates. For viewers, his life and passing reflect the philosophical courage required to merge thought, action, and faith, offering lessons on persistence, cross-cultural understanding, and the mortality that frames even the most daring intellectual pursuits. Level 66, Musonius Rufus, Stoic Death and Discipline. Musonius Rufus, the Roman Stoic philosopher, likely died around 101 CE. Known for his teachings on virtue, discipline, and practical ethics, Musonius endured exile and persecution for his beliefs. His death, though not dramatic in detail, embodies the Stoic principle of accepting mortality with equanimity. For viewers, Musonius's story highlights the philosophical tension between personal integrity, societal opposition, and the inevitability of death, providing a powerful meditation on courage, ethics, and the human capacity to confront the end consciously. Level 67, Seneca, Stoicism and Suicide. Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher, statesman, and tutor of Emperor Nero, died in 65 CE, ordered to commit suicide by Nero. His death was both tragic and emblematic of the Stoic engagement with fate, choice, and reason. Seneca's final act, a methodical and reflective acceptance of death, illustrates the dangers of political entanglement and the philosophical courage to confront mortality directly. For viewers, Seneca's story blends historical intrigue, personal danger, and profound ethical reflection, demonstrating how philosophy can guide even in the most extreme circumstances. Level 68, Epictetus, Freedom in the Final Breath. Epictetus, the Greek Stoic philosopher, likely died around 135 CE. Born a slave, he achieved intellectual and moral freedom through Stoic discipline. His death, reportedly quiet, exemplifies the ultimate Stoic goal: liberation from fear, desire, and attachment. For viewers, Epictetus's story underscores the philosophical danger of remaining enslaved by circumstance or thought, and the profound insight that mortality is the final test of freedom, virtue, and internal mastery. Level 69, Marcus Aurelius, Emperor and Philosopher's Exit. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, died in 180 CE in Vindobona, modern Vienna. His life intertwined political power, military campaigns, and deep philosophical reflection. His death exemplifies the dual danger of physical threats and intellectual responsibility, illustrating the tension between governing an empire and cultivating personal virtue. For viewers, Marcus's story provides lessons on leadership, mortality, and reflection, showing that philosophical insight can coexist with power but cannot escape the ultimate finality of death. Level 70, Lucretius, Epicurean's Silent End. Lucretius, the Roman poet and Epicurean philosopher, likely died around 55 BCE. His writings, particularly De Rerum Natura, explore the natural world, atomic theory, and the nature of pleasure and mortality. The circumstances of his death are unclear, adding a layer of philosophical irony. A thinker who celebrated reason and the avoidance of fear faced the ultimate unknown. For viewers, Lucretius's story highlights the delicate tension between human understanding, philosophical courage, and the inherent uncertainty of life and death, reinforcing the reflective, immersive, and story-driven narrative of this series. Level 71, Anaximander, the first cosmologist's final thought. Anaximander, the pre-Socratic philosopher from Miletus, died around 546 BCE. Known as one of the earliest thinkers to explore cosmology, he speculated on the origins of life, the Earth, and the cosmos. He challenged mythological explanations, placing rational thought at the center of understanding nature. Anaximander's death, though not dramatic, reflects the subtle danger faced by early rational thinkers: intellectual isolation and the risk of marginalization by a society still steeped in myth. For viewers, his life and passing illustrate the pioneering courage of seeking knowledge beyond accepted norms. and the fragile mortality that contrasts with the enduring nature of ideas. Level 72, Anaximenes, breath of life and death. Anaximenes, another Milesian thinker, died around 528 BCE. He proposed air as the fundamental substance of all things, illustrating the early human attempt to find underlying principles in the natural world. His death was quiet, but his life carried the subtle peril of intellectual defiance in a society reliant on tradition. For viewers, Anaximenes' story underscores the philosophical tension between insight and societal reception, as well as the human desire to grasp the intangible essence of existence. Level 73. Leucippus, atomist's departure. Leucippus, the Greek philosopher credited with early atomist theory, lived in the 5th century BCE. He proposed that all matter consisted of indivisible atoms moving through the void, laying the groundwork for later scientific and philosophical thought. His death is largely unrecorded, illustrating a danger familiar to many thinkers: the risk of being forgotten despite pioneering insight. For viewers, Leucippus' life and passing invite reflection on intellectual legacy, the fragility of recognition, and the long shadow that groundbreaking ideas cast across centuries. Level 74, Xenophanes, critic of gods and mortality. Xenophanes of Colophon, who lived around 570 to 480 BCE, challenged the anthropomorphic depiction of gods in Greek culture. His critiques carried both intellectual and personal risk in a society deeply invested in religious myth. Xenophanes' death was likely natural, but it symbolized the enduring tension between revolutionary thought and societal conservatism. For viewers, Xenophanes' story demonstrates the philosophical danger of challenging deeply rooted beliefs and the courage required to leave a critical legacy that reshapes understanding long after one's death. Level 75. Parmenides, the path of being and final silence. Parmenides, the Eleatic philosopher, died around 450 BCE. He explored the nature of being and argued that reality is unchanging, challenging the perception of the ever-shifting world. His death embodies the subtle hazard of abstract thought, the tension between exploring eternal truths and the ephemeral nature of life itself. For viewers, Parmenides' passing is a meditation on the intersection of philosophical insight and human mortality, showing how deep thought can outlive the fragile life that produced it. Level 76. Empedocles, death by immortality. Empedocles, the pre-Socratic philosopher and poet from Acragas, died around 430 BCE, allegedly by self-immolation in Mount Etna. Legends claim he sought to prove his divinity or unite with the elements, illustrating the dangerous extremes of philosophical and mystical ambition. For viewers, Empedocles' story is both shocking and reflective, demonstrating the peril of hubris, the pursuit of ultimate knowledge, and the fine line between insight and self-destruction. His death resonates as a cautionary tale about the mortal limits of human curiosity. Level 77. Anaxagoras, the mind over cosmos. Anaxagoras, who died around 428 BCE, introduced nous, or mind, as a cosmic ordering principle. Living in Athens during a politically turbulent era, he faced trial and exile for his radical ideas. His death in relative obscurity underscores the subtle danger philosophers face when their ideas clash with political and religious orthodoxy. For viewers, Anaxagoras' life and passing illustrate the courage to reason amidst societal hostility, the interplay of politics and philosophy, and the persistence of thought beyond the physical constraints of mortality. Level 78. Thales, father of philosophy and water's return. Thales of Miletus, who lived around 624 to 546 BCE, is celebrated as the first philosopher in the Western tradition. He proposed water as the fundamental principle of all things and sought natural explanations over myth. His death, while unremarkable in detail, symbolizes the transition from myth to reason. For viewers, Thales' story emphasizes that the first steps into rational thought carry both intellectual isolation and enduring impact, reminding us that mortality cannot extinguish pioneering insight. Level 79. Protagoras, man, measure, and mortality. Protagoras, the sophist philosopher from Abdera, died around 420 BCE. Famous for the statement, "Man is the measure of all things," he emphasized human perception and relativity. His teachings were controversial, attracting societal scrutiny and criticism. Protagoras' death, likely quiet, illustrates the danger inherent in radical thought. The tension between challenging conventional wisdom and the inevitable human fragility that confines philosophical ambition. For viewers, his story is both engaging and reflective, highlighting the power of ideas to outlast the mortality of their originator. Level 80. Gorgias, the rhetorician's final argument. Gorgias, the Greek sophist and rhetorician who lived around 483 to 375 BCE, emphasized persuasion, style, and the art of argument. Living in politically volatile Sicily and Athens, Gorgias faced danger through the contentious nature of public discourse. His death, though unremarkable in historical records, symbolizes the risk inherent in intellectual performance and societal exposure. For viewers, Gorgias' story reflects the interplay of language, power, and mortality, illustrating that even persuasive brilliance cannot alter the inevitability of death, yet can leave a lasting impression on culture and thought. Level 81. Cleanthes, Stoic devotion to nature and fate. Cleanthes, the Stoic philosopher and successor to Zeno of Citium, died around 230 BCE in Athens. Known for his rigorous discipline, devotion to the Stoic philosophy, and poetic expressions of divine reason, Cleanthes lived a life of intellectual persistence. He is said to have carried a copy of his writings, often walking barefoot through the streets to demonstrate virtue over comfort. His death was natural, yet his life was filled with subtle danger, physical discomfort, societal misunderstanding, and the constant scrutiny of philosophical rivals. For viewers, Cleanthes' story exemplifies the Stoic principle that mortality is not an enemy, but a natural endpoint, emphasizing endurance, virtue, and the integration of thought and daily life. Level 82. Zeno of Citium, the founder's final lesson. Zeno of Citium, who founded the Stoic school in Athens around 334 to 262 BCE, spent his life teaching that virtue and reason are the only true goods. Legend tells that Zeno, when old and frail, walked calmly through the city, discussing ethics with students until his final days. He faced danger not from political authorities, but from societal skepticism toward his ascetic lifestyle. Zeno's death reflects the philosophical challenge of living in accordance with one's ideals while navigating the human condition. For viewers, Zeno's story highlights the Stoic notion that understanding life, cultivating virtue, and accepting mortality can be a profound journey, integrating thought, practice, and reflection. Level 83. Alan Watts, Bridging East and West to Life's End. Alan Watts, the British philosopher and interpreter of Eastern thought, died in 1973. He spent his life translating Zen, Taoist, and Vedantic philosophy for Western audiences, often confronting cultural resistance, personal challenges, and public scrutiny. Watts's death was peaceful, yet his journey embodies intellectual risk, bridging vastly different philosophical traditions in a skeptical society. For viewers, Watts's story demonstrates the philosopher's unique danger, the challenge of cultural translation, and the exposure of new ideas to public critique, emphasizing the ongoing dialogue between thought, mortality, and cultural understanding. Level 84. Richard Rorty, Pragmatism and Intellectual Vulnerability. Richard Rorty, the American pragmatist philosopher, died in 2007. Known for challenging traditional notions of objectivity and emphasizing the practical function of philosophy, Rorty faced intellectual opposition and debates that could be socially and academically perilous. His death from cancer marks the quiet end of a life devoted to questioning entrenched ideas and societal norms. For viewers, Rorty's story reflects the philosophical danger inherent in challenging collective assumptions, illustrating that the pursuit of intellectual freedom is often fraught with critique, resistance, and the ever-present shadow of mortality. Level 85. Noam Chomsky, the linguist philosopher's endgame. Noam Chomsky, one of the most influential living philosophers and linguists, continues to navigate the complex interplay of political critique, linguistic theory, and public discourse. While still alive, the risks he has faced include political opposition, public misinterpretation, and the intense scrutiny of academic peers. Chomsky's narrative shows the modern philosopher's danger, living under the weight of public expectation, intellectual responsibility, and moral engagement. For viewers, his story emphasizes that death is inevitable, but the challenge is managing life's intellectual and ethical dangers to leave a meaningful legacy. Level 86. Slavoj Žižek, Provocation and Philosophical Controversy. Slavoj Žižek, a contemporary philosopher and cultural critic, is known for provocative ideas, blending psychoanalysis, Marxism, and cultural studies. The danger in Žižek's philosophical life arises from public backlash, societal misinterpretation, and the persistent challenge of engaging with politically and culturally charged issues. While alive, his work exemplifies the modern hazard of philosophy, being misunderstood or vilified while attempting to illuminate deeper truths. For viewers, Žižek's story demonstrates that intellectual life involves confronting external pressures and the personal risks inherent in speaking uncomfortable truths. Level 87. Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, Enlightenment Courage. Lessing, the German Enlightenment philosopher, died in 1781. A dramatist and critic, he championed religious tolerance, reason, and aesthetic philosophy in a period of rigid orthodoxy. The danger in Lessing's life was social, as advocating tolerance often risked censure or marginalization. His death marked the conclusion of a life devoted to intellectual courage and societal reform. For viewers, Lessing's story highlights the delicate balance philosophers face between societal constraints and moral imperatives, showing how death punctuates the ethical urgency of thought. Level 88. Marquis de Condorcet, Revolutionary and Fatal Idealist. Condorcet, the French Enlightenment thinker and mathematician, died in 1794 during the Reign of Terror. His advocacy for human rights, education, and equality placed him in grave danger, ultimately leading to imprisonment and death in obscurity. Condorcet's demise illustrates the lethal risk of political engagement for philosophers in volatile times. For viewers, his story underscores the ultimate danger of intertwining thought and action. Intellectual bravery can confront mortality head-on, leaving a legacy of ethical and civic insight even when life ends violently. Level 89. Denis Diderot, Encyclopedic Mortality. Diderot, the editor of the Encyclopédie, died in 1784. His life was filled with intellectual audacity, critiquing established authority and collating the sum of human knowledge. Though Diderot survived societal pressures, the subtle dangers included censorship, social ostracism, and moral criticism. His death reminds viewers that philosophical courage often operates quietly, with peril embedded in social disapproval rather than overt violence. Diderot's story exemplifies the power of ideas to outlive physical life and the enduring value of intellectual risk-taking. Level 90. Giordano Bruno, Martyr for the Infinite. Giordano Bruno, the Renaissance philosopher, died in 1600, executed by burning for his radical ideas on cosmology, infinity, and theological reform. His death is one of the most dramatic in philosophical history, embodying the existential danger of challenging religious orthodoxy. Bruno's life and fiery death illustrate the ultimate risk. Intellectual defiance can be lethal in rigid societies. For viewers, Bruno's story is both shocking and reflective, emphasizing the courage, sacrifice, and enduring impact of those who dare to expand human understanding, confronting mortality in its most literal and terrifying form. Level 91. David Hume, The Skeptic's Quiet Departure. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher whose writings on empiricism, skepticism, and human understanding challenged conventional thought, spent his last years immersed in reflection. Despite enduring public criticism for questioning religion and causality, Hume's mind remained sharp until his final days. In the quiet of Edinburgh, surrounded by a few close friends, he faced death with calm rationality, embodying his own philosophical principles, acceptance of life's uncertainties, and an understanding that human reason, though powerful, has limits. His death was peaceful, yet it resonated with the quiet danger of a life spent challenging orthodoxy. Hume's legacy, surviving centuries, continues to invite reflection on human cognition, morality, and mortality, leaving viewers to ponder the silent power of reason when confronted with life's ultimate certainty. Level 92. Karl Marx, Revolutionary Thought and the Isolation of Genius. Karl Marx, the radical thinker and political theorist, died at home in London after a life of exile, poverty, and intellectual labor. Marx's work on class struggle, historical materialism, and economic theory challenged the foundations of society. Surrounded by family, he passed from bronchitis and pleurisy, a quiet contrast to his tumultuous revolutionary ideas. The story of his death highlights the personal hazards of revolutionary thought, social isolation, political persecution, and the mental strain of reshaping society in imagination. For viewers, Marx's life and death emphasize the tension between visionary intellect and human vulnerability, showing that even the most transformative ideas cannot shield one from the fragility of the body or the solitude of the mind. Level 93. Thomas Aquinas, Mysticism and Scholarly Humility. Thomas Aquinas, the towering medieval philosopher and theologian, passed away quietly at the Abbey of Fossanova while traveling to participate in the Second Council of Lyon. Known for integrating Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, Aquinas reportedly had a mystical vision before his death, claiming that all his written works were like straw compared to the divine truth he perceived. His death encapsulates both the peaceful closure of a life devoted to learning and the existential danger of striving to comprehend the divine. For viewers, Aquinas' passing illustrates humility in intellectual pursuit, the confrontation with the unknowable, and the subtle risk of overestimating human understanding in the face of infinite mysteries. Level 94. John Locke, Liberal Thought and Life's Final Reflection. John Locke, the philosopher of empiricism and political liberalism, died at his home in Essex, having spent decades shaping ideas about natural rights, governance, and human understanding. Locke's final moments were marked by contemplation, a quiet reflection on a lifetime of intellectual endeavor. While peaceful, his death represents the subtle danger of philosophical engagement. Ideas may challenge societal norms, invite controversy, and isolate their thinker. Locke's passing underscores the enduring power of thought. Though the philosopher is mortal, the influence of his ideas transcends his life, teaching viewers that intellectual courage and clarity can leave a lasting societal legacy. Level 95. René Descartes, Rational Mind Meets Mortal Fragility. René Descartes, the rationalist philosopher, died in Stockholm while tutoring Queen Christina of Sweden. The harsh Nordic winter contributed to pneumonia, claiming his life prematurely. Descartes' passing illustrates the tangible dangers philosophers face when intellect intersects with environment, society, and ambition. Despite his revolutionary ideas on rationalism and the nature of existence, Descartes could not escape mortality. For viewers, his story combines historical drama with reflective insight. The tension between mind and body, ambition and vulnerability, and the undeniable inevitability of death, even for the greatest intellects. Level 96. Friedrich Nietzsche, the tragic visionary. Friedrich Nietzsche's death followed a decade of mental collapse caused by illness, likely compounded by syphilis. The philosopher who proclaimed the death of God and explored existential risk lived his last years incapacitated, surrounded by caretakers. His story is profoundly tragic. A thinker who explored human transcendence and nihilism ultimately became a victim of bodily frailty. Nietzsche's passing illustrates the danger inherent in confronting uncomfortable truths, both personally and socially. For viewers, this level emphasizes the intersection of intellectual daring, societal misunderstanding, and human vulnerability, showing that even the most radical philosophical insight cannot alter the inevitability of mortality. Level 97. Immanuel Kant, Routine, Reason, and Peaceful Passing. Immanuel Kant died peacefully in Königsberg, a philosopher whose meticulous life and rigorous thought defined a generation. Kant's death illustrates the balance between disciplined living and reflective contemplation, demonstrating that mortality is a natural conclusion even for the most structured mind. For viewers, Kant's story invites reflection on routine, rationality, and the serenity that comes with a life harmonized between thought, ethics, and practical order. His passing exemplifies how thoughtful living can mitigate fear of death, yet reminds us that even order cannot prevent the inevitability of mortality. Level 98. Aristotle, Exile, Wisdom, and Final Breath. Aristotle, the student of Plato and teacher of Alexander the Great, died in Euboea after fleeing Athens to avoid political persecution. His death, though natural, came after years of navigating political tension, teaching, and extensive philosophical inquiry. For viewers, Aristotle's life and death reflect the dangers philosophers face from societal pressures and political instability, as well as the enduring impact of ideas. Even in mortality, Aristotle's intellectual legacy, ranging from logic to metaphysics, ethics to biology, ensures that his wisdom continues to shape human thought centuries later, emphasizing the interplay between human vulnerability and the immortality of ideas. Level 99. Plato. The Mentor's End. Plato, founder of the Academy and student of Socrates, died in Athens after a lifetime of teaching, writing, and shaping the intellectual landscape of Greece. His death marked the serene conclusion of a life devoted to philosophy, mentorship, and the pursuit of ideal forms. For viewers, Plato's passing demonstrates the subtle danger of philosophical life, the risk of being misunderstood, overlooked, or opposed during one's life, even while establishing ideas that will outlive them. Plato's story emphasizes that death does not diminish philosophical influence. It transforms personal endeavor into a legacy that inspires generations. Level 100. Socrates. Martyrdom for Reason. Socrates, the Athenian philosopher, died by hemlock poisoning after being condemned for impiety and corrupting youth. Socrates' calm and courageous acceptance of death embodies the ultimate philosophical risk, confronting societal power with integrity and truth. His final dialogues, as recounted in Phaedo, reveal a deep commitment to reason, virtue, and moral principle. For viewers, Socrates' story is both shocking and inspirational. It demonstrates that philosophy can demand the ultimate sacrifice, and that intellectual and moral courage leaves an indelible imprint on history. His death transforms human mortality into a testament to enduring wisdom, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of understanding.